Welcome to Nugget 283 with Steve and Dana Groman. Back in Nugget 278, we talked about the pterodactyl of Big Bend National Park, and I had mentioned that I would take you there, and that is exactly what we're doing in Nuggets 283 and 284. In the Chihuahuan Desert, the largest desert in North America, the extraordinary and remote Big Bend National Park controls 801,163 acres along the international boundary established along the Willow and Cottonwood-lined Rio Grande. Vegetation includes 1,200 kinds of plants, such as Engelmann prickly pear cactus, giant dagger yuccas with 70-pound stalks and white blooms, lechugia patches, and bright green sawtooth-leaved sotols. Indians, miners, farmers, ranchers, army, soldiers, international bandits, and tourists have traversed this area for centuries. Approaching from the north through the Santiago Mountains Gap, follow the park road to the Persimmon Gap Visitor Center, one of 4 visitor centers. The Gap was part of the Comanche Trail. Next, encounter an outdoor exhibit of fossils that were found in the nearby sandstone. Piercing deeper into the park at the Panther Junction Visitor Center, see a hadrosaur femur bone. On one visit, we saw the pterosaur wing that was found at the park by Douglas Lawson in 1971. It was the first Quetzalcoatlus, a pterosaur, fossil found in the world. The original bones are held at the University of Texas in Austin. The pterosaur was the largest flying animal. Back to the guide of the national parks of the Southwest and their entry on Big Bend. Named for its location, Big Bend sits in the crooked elbow of the Rio Grande as it demarcates the international border between West Texas and Mexico. Along this 118-mile stretch, the river has incised a trio of deep, gorgeous canyons: Santa Elena, Mariscal, and Boquillas. No, the Rio Grande River has not incised these canyons. The Rio Grande flows through these canyons. Nearly all the park is desert, yet overall, the color of the land is surprisingly green, even in the driest times. Rising out of the lowlands are wild, tortured hills and mountains, the most impressive of which are the Chisa Mountains in the core of the park. Sheer cliffs, flat-top mesas, and sprawling arroyos add to the scenery. Elevation extends from 1,800 feet at the river to more than 7,800 feet at Emery Peak, the park's highest point. Big Bend is far from almost anywhere. That remoteness and isolation have, in many ways, served as its salvation. Big Bend has seen radically different environments through time. The oldest rocks now exposed in the park are about 300 million years old. I don't think so. Seas covered this part of Texas for a couple hundred million years, leaving behind sediments that were cemented into sandstones and limestones. I don't think so. I think it was Noah's flood that covered this part of Texas and the entire earth around 4,400 years ago. As the oceans receded, as the floodwaters receded, swamps and riverbeds became home to dinosaurs like the plant-eating Alamosaurus, whose huge vertebrae have been unearthed in the park. About 70 million years ago, as the land began rising, the skies were home to the amazing Quetzalcoatlus, a pterosaur with a 35-foot wingspan. This all occurred pre-flood, not 70 million years ago. Things were quiet for a bit, then a series of violent volcanic eruptions began to rock the region about 50 million years ago, spewing ash and lava across the land, making the Chisa Mountains and many other topographic features look freshly fired. With cooler times during the Ice Age, animals such as the hippo-like Corphodon, turtles, crocodiles, garfish, and 4-toed horses inhabited Big Bend. We all know that this was an event called Noah's flood. The aftermath is the topography we see today that has formed the beautiful Chisa Mountains. Human beings didn't come into the scene until about 10,000 years ago. Let's make that 6,000 years ago and 4,400 years ago when the flood occurred, leaving behind only a few hunting tools. Spaniards arrived in the 1500s and called this the Despoblado, or uninhabited land. And back to this book, The Guide to the National Parks of the United States. And what's kind of neat about this book is I actually bought it at Big Bend National Park. And this is what this book has to say. Of course, more evolutionary information. The rocks of Big Bend are a complex lot. 2 seas, one after another, flowed and subsided in the region hundreds of millions of years ago, leaving thick deposits of limestone and shale. The present mountains, except the Chisos, uplifted along with the Rockies, roughly 75 million years ago. Around the same time, a 40-mile wide trough, most of the present-day park, sank along fault lines, leaving the cliffs of Santa Elena Canyon to the west and the Sierra del Carmen to the east, rising rising 1,500 feet above the desert floor. In the center, volcanic activity spewed layer upon layer of ash into the air and squeezed molten rock up through the ground to form the Chisa Mountains some 35 million years ago. Molten rock also cooled and hardened underground, later to be exposed by erosion. Big Bend's topographic variety supports a remarkable diversity of life, including 1,200 plant species, some found nowhere else in the world. These events did happen, but again, it was part of Noah's flood and not over millions and millions of years ago, as described here in this book. They talk about how to visit. There is a significant amount of paved roads to reach most of the highlights, but there are also a lot of backcountry four-wheel drive roads, and we have taken many of those and seen the backside, the inside track of Big Bend, and we'll be going to some of those places in Nugget 284. One of those great places, as described in this picture, says eroded soft rock plugs created by volcanic eruptions, no doubt, at the time of Noah's flood. Stop at Tough Canyon, carved by Blue Creek through layers of lava flows, boulders, and compressed volcanic ash called Tough. Blue Creek did not carve this canyon. Blue Creek runs through this canyon. Castellan is an old army post that protected residents from bandits during the 1914 to 1918 border troubles with Mexico. After leaving Castellan, the road parallels the Rio Grande. Be sure to stop about 8 miles from Castellan at the parking area for the Santa Elena Canyon Overlook. Laden with abrasive silt and gravel, the Rio Grande sculpted the canyon 1,500 feet deep through the cliffs that tower above the geological trough that forms the bulk of the park. This sign reads Cerro Castellan, Castellan Peak in English. The layers visible in Cerro Castellan reveal millions of years of volcanic events. Stacked in this tower are several lava flows and volcanic tuffs, which are ash deposits, with layers of gravel and clay from periods of erosion between eruptions. As you continue on the drive, look for further signs of volcanism, pale beds of volcanic ash, and dark basaltic boulders. Many of Big Bend's dramatic landmarks have molten origins. Though the Mule's Ears Peak, Cerro Castellan, and Chisa's Mountains appear isolated from one another, they are closely related. Cerro Castellan's cap rock is the same lava that formed the Chisa's south rim. Ash layers older than Cerro Castellan's can also be found at Tough Canyon. It's because they were all a part of the same event. The colors are simply beautiful in these formations. About the Santa Elena Canyon. Except during flood season, the quiet waters below do not seem powerful enough to have carved Santa Elena Canyon. No, they haven't, and they didn't. It just flows through the crack. And on the sign, they show how this river is carving this and leaving the mesas, the remnant bedrock, exposing the steep-walled canyons. And this was interesting. On any day, you might see rafts emerging from Santa Elena Canyon. Modern equipment and techniques enable river runners to negotiate the rapids upstream, but the trip was not always this safe. Unable to scout the broken, almost impassable terrain, the 1852 Boundary Survey launched an empty wooden boat at the canyon entrance. Only splinters and broken planks emerged at the canyon mouth. That's kind of scary. In 1882, a team of surveyors and Texas Rangers made the first documented journey through Santa Elena Canyon, though they portaged around the rock slide. Once they entered the sheer-walled gorge, there was no escape, no place to climb out. Landscapes in stone. The desert appears permanent, but the rocks exposed in Tornilla Flat contain evidence of a dynamic Big Bend. From tide flats to forests to grasslands, this vista has changed dramatically during the past 70 million years. Well, I would like to say that it has changed drastically over the last 6,000 years. One of the next stops is Boquillas Canyon Overlook. The Mexicans traversed the water with horses, and they put up their trinkets on rocks in the parking lot of the Overlook. And yes, I had to buy something. I bought the little ocotillo for $5, and I still have it, although it is quite faded by now because I have it out in my cactus collection that is outside most of the time. And here are some of the horses as they rode them back and forth through the river to collect the money. Once they saw that you put money in the bucket, the people would come back over, claim their money. They would go back home and wait until more tourists came and bought their goods. The sunsets are spectacular at Big Bend, and we'll show you more in the next Nugget. If you appreciate our content, tell others and repost on your social platforms. Thank you.